How are you? Great. Yeah, all right. Happy Father's Day. If we've never met, my name is Jay, and I'm on staff here. Great to meet you. Welcome to Westgate. So glad you're here on a very special day. We celebrate you, dads. If you are a dad, well done. I know it's hard work. I've known that for a short little while now, which I'll talk about briefly. But here's also something I know about Father's Day. Father's Day means all sorts of things to all sorts of people. I get that. For some of us, Father's Day is a day to remember and celebrate the amazing relationships we have with our amazing dads. For those of us who are dads, for some of us dads, it's a day to remind ourselves and to appreciate and to embrace and remember the amazing relationships we have with our amazing kids. For others of us, for many of us, Father's Day is something else. For many of us, Father's Day is a day every year that we just sort of have to survive, because Father's Day is a day for many of us that reminds us of all sorts of awkwardness and tension, maybe some pain, some hurt, a little bit of shame and guilt, and maybe some regret. I know that in a room this size with this many people, for some of us in this room, this Father's Day in particular is a difficult one, because maybe it's our first Father's Day without our dad here. Maybe we are dealing with the pain and hurt of loss. And so Father's Day means all sorts of things to all sorts of people, and sometimes it changes from year to year what Father's Day means to us. If you'll allow me for a moment, I just want to get personal just for a second. For me, today, this Father's Day is a really special one, because today is actually my first Father's Day as a father. Yeah, thank you. I didn't really actually do anything. My wife did all the work. I just kind of watched, but I'll take the applause. Thank you. But 8 weeks ago, my wife gave birth to a beautiful little girl named Harper. She is the best baby in the history of the universe, as all new parents say about their children, and it is true every single time. She is just the light and joy of our life, and we are just completely smitten and mesmerized. You know how it goes, some of you. Love her to death. And so today is a very special day for us because I'm a dad for the very first time. But Father's Day has been, up to this point in my life, and to be totally honest, even today is still tinged with a little bit of tension and awkwardness and pain, as it is for many of you. Father's Day, for me, has always been a difficult day. It's a day, like I said before, for me at least, a day that I've had to sort of just survive and endure for most of my life. My parents separated long before I can remember, when I was just a young child. And so I have really no recollection of my dad. He wasn't present in my life. He lived on the other side of the world, and I grew up with absolutely no relationship with him. And he passed away a few years ago. And so there is still, even on a day like this, when I'm celebrating the joy of my 8-week-old daughter, it's still a day that reminds me of some hurt and some pain. Father's Day is a difficult day for me, as it is for many of you. And what I've realized in recent years, actually, is that my pain and my hurt, when I think about the broken story of my relationship with my own dad, I used to think that the source of my hurt was the fact that I didn't know my dad. And while a part of that is true, what I've come to realize in recent years, actually, is that there is a deeper hurt and a deeper pain embedded deep inside of my soul. And it's not really so much that I didn't know my dad. I've come to realize that my deepest hurt and pain and regret in terms of my broken story with my father is really because I realized that my dad didn't know me. And here's the deal. Deep inside every single one of us, whether we had a fantastic relationship with our dads or a terrible one or something in between, the fact remains for every human being on the planet, deep inside each and every one of us is a desire, an intrinsic desire to be known intimately, to be known in a meaningful way, and in particular, to be known by those who ought to know us best, like our dads. And when we do not feel known the way we think we ought to be known by those closest to us, there's a sense of brokenness and emptiness and loss and hurt and pain. This is problematic in our relationship with God because if you've been around the church or Christianity for any length of time, and even if you haven't, you have probably heard multiple times God referred to as God our Heavenly Father. That's right. Father is one of the most common metaphors we use to help us understand our relationship with God. Now, the problem is this. We often try to shove God into our metaphors. And the fact remains that our metaphors, like God as our Father, our metaphors are not big enough to encapsulate and to hold the entirety of who God actually is. The French philosopher Pascal once said that God made man in his image and man returned the favor. You and I, naturally, it is natural human tendency to make God in our image and in the image of our experiences. This is something that is common to all human beings. With any religious experience, we tend to make the divine into our image and into the image of our experiences. And so, when we hear that God is our Father, we end up believing that God is fickle and temperamental like we are. We end up believing that God's love is subtly conditional, as our love so often is. We end up believing these things not in our minds because we're far too intellectually savvy and theologically sound to believe such things, but in our worst moments and on those really dark days when life kicks you to the curb and shoves you in the dirt, in those moments when you are alone in the quiet and dark places of life with the shame and the guilt and the insecurities and the pain that nobody else knows about, in those moments, in a place deeper than our intellect, deeper than our theology, we end up believing this lie that God disappoints us and doesn't necessarily want to know us and love us the way that we think we ought to be known and loved. And this is because our earthly fathers, even the best of them, inevitably disappoint us from time to time. Because the best dads on the planet are still, believe it or not, human, like you and me. And what that means is that the best dads on the planet still, from time to time, will make mistakes. They will still disappoint us. They will still, here and there, let us down. And when we try to shove God into that metaphor, we run into some serious problems. See, for years, I believed that God knew me the way my earthly father knew me. I believed that God knew me from a distance. I believed that God knew me from a detached, far-off place. I believed that God knew information about me. I believed that God knew the central things about me, the sort of major points about my life. But I did not believe that God knew the details, the ins and outs of who I was. And this is because of my relationship with my own father. Without even knowing it, I began making God our Father into the image of my broken relationship with my Father here on earth. But the scriptures tell us a different story. And in fact, for some of us in this room, our own personal experiences with God our Father affirm this different, new, fresh understanding of what the scriptures mean when they tell us that God knows us. Shortly after my wife and I found out we were pregnant, actually, I wasn't pregnant. My wife was pregnant. I don't know why dads say that, right? Like, I didn't do anything. I was just kind of cheering her on. She did all the work. Shortly after we found out that Jenny was pregnant, we went to the hospital. I think it was about 7 weeks into the pregnancy. Now, I did not know anything about babies and pregnancy and how that whole thing works. So we're driving to the hospital for our very first ultrasound. It's 7 weeks in, and I'm thinking to myself, we're going to go see like this ultrasound image of, 2 arms, 2 legs, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and my baby's going to be smiling and waving at me like, "Hi, Daddy, I'll be out in 8 months," or something, right? Like, that's what I'm thinking. And we show up, and they put the goop on Jenny's belly, and they start doing the ultrasound, and this is what I see, this image right here. Let's put up that next slide of the ultrasound. And I'm thinking to myself, that's not my baby, that's an almond, right? Like, I think my wife had some almonds, some trail mix. I think that is an almond that has not yet been digested. And the doctor's like, no, it's like 7 weeks. This is what your child looks like right now. And once the initial disappointment of the fact that it wasn't like a fully formed human dissipated, I began to just be mesmerized by this little image, this little black and white image of my little almond. The doctor printed this ultrasound image out, and we took it home, and I hung it on this little magnetic wall we have in our kitchen. And for weeks, every morning on my way out to work, and every evening once I came back home from the office, I would find myself standing in the kitchen for minutes on end, just staring at my little black and white almond, mesmerized. And without knowing, at this point, we didn't know her gender. We didn't know what her personality was going to be like. We didn't know what she would look like. We didn't know the ferocity of her power to poop as much as she does. We didn't know any of that stuff, and yet I found myself already falling in love with this little person who was to be our own. And I'm human. I'm just a regular person like you with a finite imagination and very finite knowing and understanding. God, in his infinite imagination and his limitless knowing, says this. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Psalm 103, 13 to 14. "As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he knows how we are formed. He remembers that we are dust." Psalm 139, 13 to 16, the psalmist says this about God: "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." When the psalmist in Psalm 139 writes that God saw our unformed bodies, that word saw, or to see, in the original language, the ancient Hebrew, is actually a word that has much deeper meaning than just physical, visible sight. It is actually a word that would better be translated to behold. In fact, in certain parts of the scriptures, it is also translated, the same word, it's translated to enjoy. The psalmist is reminding us that before any one of us had physical being, before any of us ever existed in this reality that we call human experience, God saw us. Not only did he see us, it wasn't just a passing glance or a quick looking and then moving on. It was a beholding. Before you came to be, God beheld you. He enjoyed you. It is the image of a father with a loving, longing gaze at an image on the kitchen wall. Before you ever came into existence, God knew you. He saw you. He beheld you. He enjoyed you. He, with longing and love, gazed into your soul, into your life, and into your story. If no one on the planet knows you, if the entire world has disappointed you, even if your own mother and father have let you down, if you hear nothing else, hear this today. You are known. You have been known for longer than you have known yourself. God has beheld you. He has been enjoying you since before the dawn of time. My little girl, Harper, she's 8 weeks old, and if you know anything about newborns, you know that for the first few weeks, they're just sort of emotionless blobs. They just eat, sleep, poop, repeat, right? And they cry when they want to eat, sleep, or poop, right? And that's kind of their existence. But in recent weeks, the last couple of weeks, she's maturing, she's growing, and so she's starting to be able to pay attention for a while. And it's amazing. Sometimes, this happens a few times a day now, I'll be holding her, I'll be rocking her, and all of a sudden her eyes will lock onto mine and something changes, and she's so focused on me. And even though she doesn't have words yet, as she's focusing on me, I can see from her eyes, she is telling me, she is saying to me, "Who is this stud of a man?" And I say to her, "I am your father." No, that's not what she's probably saying. "What is this strange, peculiar thing in front of me? Feed me, I'm hungry," right? That's probably what she's saying. But it's amazing. She is beginning to lock into me. And she doesn't know the nuances of our relationship. She doesn't know that I'm her dad. She doesn't even know what that means. But she is beginning to know me. And it is mesmerizing. It's like I don't have words for it, but she locks eyes with me and something is happening. Some connection is there, and it is life-giving to me. We all long to be known, and you are known. God has locked his gaze upon you, and he has been lovingly and longingly beholding you and enjoying you, seeing you fully and richly for far longer than you could ever know. And here's the beautiful thing about this, is that even though God knows us so intimately, not just all of our good stuff, not just all of our successes, not just all of the great traits about ourselves that we put on our Facebook feed, but even though God also knows all of the negative, all of the insecurity, all of the guilt, all of the shame, all of the dirt, all of the filth of our lives, even though God knows all of those things, the beautiful reality today and for all of time is that in spite of his knowing us, he loves us. His posture toward us is a posture of love. There's this sacred Jewish prayer called the Avinu Malkeinu. And that phrase, Avinu Malkeinu, simply means our Father, our King. It's this really well-known, holy, sacred, beautiful, powerful prayer in the Jewish tradition. In fact, Orthodox Jews to this very day still continue to pray this traditional prayer, particularly on very specific sacred holidays on the Jewish calendar, the Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. And the power and beauty of this prayer is that it reminds us that God, our Father, is a Father who is king over all of time and space. He is a king who rules and reigns in majesty and glory upon his throne. And it's beautiful because it's this powerful reminder that as our king, God our Father is omniscient and omnipresent, and he is in control, and he can do all things, and all things will be made well, and we're going to be okay because God our king sits high upon his throne, and he is our Father, and he's in control, and we're going to be okay. And that is a wonderful truth. But when Jesus came to the earth, he gave us another side of the story. He began, for the first time in the history of all religions, he began calling God a name that no one had ever called him before. It's a word you've heard. Abba. Jesus began calling God the Father, not just the Father King, but Father Abba. We don't have a very clean English translation for the word Abba, but the best translation would probably be daddy. It's infantile. It's a little juvenile. It's innocent. It's pure. It's a sort of trust that's just complete and childlike. And Jesus begins to call God Abba. See, Jewish children at the time of Jesus would use that word Abba to refer to their dads when they were young. But as a term for God or for the divine, this was unprecedented, not just in Judaism, but in all world religions. In fact, the German scholar Joachim Jeremias says that Abba, as a way of addressing God, is an authentic, original utterance of Jesus. And we are confronted with something new and astounding. Herein lies the great novelty of the gospel. That God our Father is not simply an all-powerful, distant, detached Father who rules and reigns as king upon his majestic and glorious throne, but that he is also Father who is our dad. He's close. He's intimate. He's near. He loves us. He enjoys us. He wants to be with us. 1 John 3:1 reminds us of this great love. See what great love the Father has lavished on us that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are. We are his kids. The writer, Brendan Manning, I love the way he says it. He says that in human beings, love is a quality, a high-prized virtue, but in God, love is his identity. God, our Father, doesn't give us love or send us love or show us love. God, our Father, is love. And if you are with him, if you are near him, you are loved. You are known and you are loved in ways that you cannot possibly imagine. And in our worst moments, this becomes incredibly difficult to believe. I know it does for me. Because again, our metaphors screw us up. The metaphor of God as Father screws me up. Here's the deal. I love my little girl more than I have loved anything in this life. It's unbelievable the depths of love that I am beginning to excavate because of this little tiny human living in my house. But it pales in comparison to the sort of love that God has for you and for me, for every person on this planet. In the ancient Roman world, during the time of Jesus, when a mother was giving birth to a child, it was customary, very commonplace, for there to be a midwife in the room. And typically, delivery happened in the home. And so there would be a midwife who would help with the delivery. She would assist. And here's how it worked. The mother would deliver the child, and before the child was handed over to mother or father or anybody else, the first person to handle the newborn infant was the midwife. And it was the job, the role and responsibility of the midwife to inspect the child for any defects or deformities, any inkling of anything even remotely wrong. And if the midwife would find even the remote possibility that something might be a little bit wrong about this child, a little bit off about this child, even an inkling, it was the job, the duty of the midwife to take this newborn child and to place the child on the floor, in the dirt. And the only person with the legal right and responsibility to pick up the child. And picking up the child would symbolize that the child was now accepted into the family as a beloved son or daughter. The only person with a legal right and responsibility to do such a thing was the father. If the father would come and pick up the child from off the floor and embrace the child, it symbolized, again, that the child had been received, accepted as a beloved son or daughter of the father, and accepted and received into the family. But it was also the legal right of the father to look at this child on the ground, to see the child's brokenness, and if he so choose, to turn his back and to walk away. And if the father would turn his back and walk away, it symbolized that the child no longer belonged to this family. And in the first century Roman world, archaeology has shown this dark, tragic reality. These children, when the father would turn his back and walk away, were literally discarded like trash. And in our worst moments, when we are alone with the brokenness and pain and hurt of our lives, when we excavate deep down inside into the depths of our souls, get to that place where it's dark, where we hold our deepest hurt, our deepest regret, our deepest insecurities. Those moments when we feel like we're not worth it, like we're just not cutting it, like we're playing catch up all the time in life. Those moments when we feel like life is just passing us by and we're not significant, we're not making a difference, when there seems to be no way out of the rut in which we find ourselves. In those moments, sometimes we feel like the child on the floor. And in our worst moments, even though our theology tells us otherwise, we wonder if God, our Father, will pick us up. We wonder if God, our Father, maybe hasn't turned his back and walked away. The psalmist in Psalm 27, verses 9 to 10, reminds us of this truth. And this is the Message paraphrase. You've always been right there for me. Don't turn your back on me now. Don't throw me out. Don't abandon me. You've always kept the door open. My father and mother walked out on me and left me, but God took me in. Even in your worst moments, even with all of the baggage of your life, all the mistakes you've made, all the wrong that has been done to you, and all the wrong you have done to yourself and to others, in the midst of all the darkness and pain of your life, when you feel as though you are the child on the ground, even if your own mother and father betray you, even if the world kicks you down, even if it feels like no one on the planet knows you or loves you. God, your Father, takes you in. He has known you before the dawn of time, and he loves you in ways that you cannot possibly imagine. There's a writer named Henry Nouwen who had a friend in New York City who was also a writer, a really successful writer. He wrote for the New York Times. He had won all sorts of awards and accolades for his writing. On paper, this friend of Henry Nouwen's had essentially made it. And yet this friend found himself at a loss because he felt unloved. In fact, this friend of Henry Nouwen's had spent his entire life trying to accomplish as much as he could because he believed that his accomplishments would somehow earn him love. And after accomplishing all that he could accomplish, he discovered that it did not, that he still felt unloved. And Henry Nouwen wrote him a letter. And the letter, this long letter, would eventually become a book called You Are the Beloved. And essentially, Nouwen tells his friend, you cannot possibly earn the sort of love that you want, the only love that will satisfy, the love of God our Father. You cannot possibly earn that love because you already have it. And so as we close, I don't know what your story with your Father is. For some of you, it's amazing and beautiful. For others of you, like me, it's a story of absence and pain. And for many of us, it's a story somewhere in between. Some of us today are simply dealing with the pain of loss that our earthly father is no longer here with us. I don't know what you are going through. I don't know what the stress and pain and tension and hurt of your life is. But wherever you are, whatever it feels like down on the ground of the pain of your life, you must remember this. You are known, you are loved, and God takes you in. You cannot earn this love because you already have it. And so in a moment, I'm going to ask you to stand. And I simply, as we close, I want to read a short excerpt from Henry Nouwen's book, Over Us as a Prayer, and then we'll sing. So would you all stand? So I'll stand and just close our eyes, and we'll begin with this, just a brief moment with our eyes closed in silence, remembering this truth, that we are the beloved sons and daughters of God. Let's just take a moment in silence to remember that truth. All I want to say to you is this: you are the beloved. And all I hope is that you can hear these words as spoken to you with all the tenderness and force that love can hold. My only desire is to make these words reverberate in every corner of your being. You are the beloved. Amen.